Hi, everyone. This is Doug. This is part 2 or episode 2 on our issue of Isaiah 53 claims of Tovia Singer. And again, he was primarily relying upon Isaiah 53, verse 8, which has the word them, meaning a plural, and instead of him, which should have been singular. And therefore, he knows that even though there's many he's and hims and singulars throughout the text of Isaiah 53 and also the ending verses in 52 that connect to it, he just knows from that you can infer that the person involved here is not a human being of a singular nature, like a man, a single man, but instead it would be an entire people, the people of Israel, and they're the servant. And he's right that in Isaiah 42, there was the servant Israel, but it actually calls it my servant Israel. So the suffering servant is referenced clearly as he and him and over again in this passage he's looking at. But just this primary reference here in 53:8 is what he says blows that all up. But the problem with that is none of the texts that you could rely upon that are Masoretic even say this. So yet you'll see where he's getting it from, and I'm going to show you. I found out what I think is probably his source. So anyway, here's my conclusion. The best and only known Masoretic sources, that is the one, the Ben Chayyim, 2, the Leningrad Codex, and 3, the Aleppo Codex. These are the only 3 lines of Masoretic texts that exists, that I could find out that they even exist. All these Jewish translations into English of these, each and every one of them, rebut whatever is Tovia Singer's source for Isaiah 53, verse 8. Okay, so that's a big claim, but easily proven, as I will show you. Now, I just want to digress a little bit here, is the Ben Chayyim is a text that was the basis of Leeser's translation of 1853, which I referred to in the prior episode. And it also was the basis of the Jewish Publication Society version of 1917, but it expressly said what it's doing different than what Leeser did is they're going to use marginal notes to interpret that interpretation, and a marginal note is going to influence how they translate. And that's something that Leeser was getting away from. He was not doing that. I mean, he's Orthodox, and I don't know if Jewish Publication Society is considered Orthodox, but maybe it's a difference between Orthodox views of being very strict, more Karaite, if you will. Leeser was being more strict and not doing that, but the Jewish Publication Society wanted to do that. And you will see differences between these 2 translations. All right, so I just want to point that out first. Now, I can prove what I just showed you. There's only these 3 sources by looking at a text by or an article by Professor Emanuel Tov, a top expert, Jewish expert, and he's talking about the Bible and the Masoretic text, and I have the word medieval there for a reason. A lot of people think, well, Masoretic means it was the time of the Bible. Masoretic is a medieval group of men from the 700s. They began to be scribes and to call themselves the Masoretes. And they would make interpretations and put them in marginal notes. And so basically, if they had some thoughts of what a verse might mean or a word might mean, they put down all these interpretations of what it could mean and so on. But they wouldn't change the text translation. They just try to throw out ideas to think about. Anyway, so this is at Torah.com, and I want to read this to you. The oldest source of the MT Bible is the Aleppo Codex from approximately 925 Christian era. So I'm going to pause there. So a lot of Jewish people even, I think, are misled about this, but based on what I received from Jewish people. The Aleppo Codex has not existed continuously in use by Judaism at large. There was a synagogue in Syria, at Aleppo, that did so, and that text was handed over in 1959 to the other people, but they were very resistant to even allow the other Jewish people of Israel to see it. And it took a long time for that to be extracted from their hands. So that was not in continuous use anywhere, and it was not considered even a known line of heritage. And then the other text is the Leningrad Codex, and you can tell by the name Leningrad, it's from the era of communism. So we're talking about it in the 1900s, and it was first produced and printed in Hebrew in 1937 by Biblia Hebraica as a book entitled Biblia Hebraica. And the Leningrad Codex did not get translated into English until 1999. And we're going to take a look at that for Isaiah 53, verse 8, and we'll even read all of it. So the point of all this is that, what did I just say to you? I said there are 3 sources, Ben Chayyim, and then the Leningrad Codex and the Aleppo Codex. Here he's trying to say the oldest source of the Masoretic text Bible. So if you said Masoretic text, you would be saying it's the oldest source would be Aleppo, and the oldest source would be the Codex of Leningrad. But they were not even in the hands of anybody. So until like the 1800s and the 1900s. So something's wrong here. He's not telling you for some reason about the Ben Chayyim. And the Ben Chayyim was the collection of the Masoretic texts that were in use amongst Judaism. So why are they jumping off that train over to here to these texts? I don't know why. It's a good question. Why is he running away from the Ben Chayyim? I don't know. But it doesn't matter because they're very similar to each other, okay? The only thing is the translation of the Ben Chayyim by the Jewish Publication Society, and that's what they're using, varies because they're willing to use marginal notes, while Ben Chayyim, in the hands of Mr. Leeser, doesn't appear to do that. Okay, so let's move on. I'll get to the Tovia Singer text in just a second. I just want to give you the dates. So, number one, Ben Chayyim is from 1525. It was translated first from Hebrew into English by a rabbi named Leesser in 1853. He was Orthodox of faith in the Judaism, rabbi for years, and he made multiple translations from 1853 to 1907, but they don't affect Isaiah 53 at all. They're all the same. Second is the Leningrad Codex. This was translated into English by the Jewish Publication Society in 1999, known as the Jewish Bible. So, but that Leningrad Codex was only found in the more recent era. So this is not somewhere in the middle. By 1937, let's put it that way, it's published for the first time in print by Biblia Hebraica. Number three is the Aleppo Codex, was discovered outside Aleppo in 1959. So the story is that when it was sold by somebody in trade, he said, well, this was used at a synagogue in Aleppo, and that synagogue itself didn't want to give up any other materials that it had, and there was a big battle going on. But anyway, so it wasn't even in use until 1959, and there is actually no, you have to be a scholar to be able to look at this stuff. It has not been translated yet into any English text, but scholars have gone through it, and it's absolutely, as to Isaiah 53, it's absolutely 100% identical to the Dead Sea Scrolls from 2,000 years earlier. Absolutely identical, except for 3 letters. And all the other letters that are not identical are just simply spelling or irrelevant type of differences. So only 3 letters are added that were not there or are in the Dead Sea Scrolls that are not in the Aleppo Codex, and it's the word for light, and you'll see why it's material. All right, so here's a review of part 1. This was the starting screen. Isaiah 53, source text of Singer, materially mismatches the Jewish Publication Society version of 1917, Leeser of 1843, and the Dead Sea Scrolls text of approximately 200 BC. So let's take a look. Now, again, we're looking at Isaiah 53:8. That's the key issue that we're focusing on. So Mr. Singer had in his book, Let's Get Biblical, Volume 1, at page 94, this text here, and I could not find this text anywhere. So I was telling people I can't find a source text for it, meaning a Masoretic text or anything that would match this from a Masoretic source. And but I did have Mr. Leeser's version, which is based on the Ben Chayyim I told you earlier. I just wanted to show you, I found the 1907 edition, so I want to update my reference. It's identical. In other words, 1907 is the same as 1853. So nothing's ever changed in his view of that passage. And it has laid on him. The plague was laid on him. Mr. Singer doesn't have that. I'll show you that. So I have verse 8 broken out over here. Here it is. From imprisonment and from judgment he is taken, and his generation who shall tell? For he was cut off from the land of the living. Because of the transgression of my people, a plague befell them. And Mr. Tovia Singer makes a big deal that this somehow proves that the servant, the suffering servant, is plural because of the them there. And as I said, that seems to me, to be very frank, is irrelevant. This is just simply a plague befell the people, my people. This issue is he was cut off because of the transgression of my people. So my people are not the same as the he by just simply using syntax, okay? And so a plague befell them is not in the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way, at all. But even if it were there, even if it said them, it doesn't prove that the he in this sentence, he is taken, he was cut off, is the them there. So besides everything else wrong with this issue for Mr. Singer, is that doesn't even prove his case when you just objectively look at the words. And you can see why the Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't have it, because it's simply saying, for he was cut off from the land of the living because of the transgression of my people. So whether you like it or not, that's what Isaiah said, and Yahweh speaking to Isaiah. So we have a clear indication that the words "a plague befell them" doesn't change any of the subject matter of who is the he, multiple times referenced here and in the entire passage. It's just simply saying a plague befell them. And again, it wasn't really there according to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But even here, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't change the he into a plural he, a uniplural noun, he, representing the people itself. It was the plague befell the people. And that doesn't prove anything about who is the he in this sentence. But let's go on and just look at it now from a textual Masoretic versus non-Masoretic origin and see what we come up with. So now, last time in part 1, I mentioned Tovia Singer in his book, Let's Get Biblical, never tells you the source of what he's quoting. Where is his authority for his readings? In other words, what's the Hebrew text from which he's relying upon, and that can be sourced to a lineage of Masoretic or some other line that is authoritative among the Jewish people. So I decided, even though he doesn't say it, let me look at his website. Maybe I get a clue. This is only a clue because, again, he doesn't ever say he uses this exclusively or whatever. So we don't know whether what I'm going to show you is binding on him in any way. But this is what he says in Outreach Judaism website. Is there an accurate translation of the Jewish scriptures by Tovia Singer? And in there, he gives this answer. The best translation of the Jewish scriptures is the Judaica Press Tanakh series. Rabbi Abraham J. Rosenberg has provided in his Leesser translation a remarkably accurate rendition of the Jewish scriptures. It comes in about 30 volumes, and it not only contains a translation of the Masoretic text, but of the great Jewish commentators as well. Pause. So there we get it. He says it's the Masoretic text, but there's not a single manuscript for that. So that's the problem. And we're going to show you the Jewish Publication Society says up through 1917, the Masoretic text to them meant the Ben Chayyim printing of 1525. Okay, so when did this change? Well, we have two discoveries, as I showed you. Let's go back. Since that Ben Chayyim, we had two discoveries of Masoretic lines that amplify or correct or maybe can be compared to. One is the Leningrad Codex, and you can find that version translated into English for the first time in 1999, or the Aleppo Codex, which has not been translated into any language yet. It was really kind of recent that it came out, but there has been scholars who have gone through and compared Isaiah 53 carefully to the Ben Chayyim, and there's only 3-letter difference, and it's the word light was missing in the Aleppo Codex, and that's it. So it's very, very similar to the Ben Chayyim. And the Leningrad Codex, we'll see what that text, how that reads, if it's significantly different at all, because we now have translation. So this is where it ends up. I don't see any possibility that you can argue that the person, let's get here, let's make it biblical. If they're relying upon Mr. Rosenberg, right? That's what he's saying, that he has to be using one of these 3 lines. There's no other line, unless he now is also taking a new tact and using Rashi's interpretation to change the words on the page. And that we don't know that. And we don't know the methodology being used in his translation, if he's making a new translation. But again, you have to know what is the source text he's looking at. Without that, you don't know what to compare. So, for example, if he said it was the Leningrad Codex, great, then we can compare it to Jewish Publication Society and say whether he's staying on board or he's going off the reservation, because the Jewish Publication Society is telling you their methodology, and maybe their methodology is stricter than his methodology, and that's so important here. So anyway, that's the bottom line. Is this is all you've got. You've got 3 sources: 1525, 1999, 1959 release of the document to scholars, but not translated yet by anybody. Aleppo Codex has not apparently been translated. I could not find a true translation of that. I want to also confirm to you that if you go to sources like Wikipedia and go to Jewish and English Bible translations article, and you go to Judaica Press, which is Rabbi Rosenberg's translation, you'll never see any mention of what is the source text from what I can read here. Okay, it'll refer to the Masoretic text. It's using the Masoretic text, the Aramaic Targum, but which one of the Masoretic texts? The Ben Chayyim, the Aleppo, or the Leningrad? Which one is it? We don't know, and therefore you can't test whatever they're claiming. So if there is a difference between any of these three on the particular passage at issue, for example, we're looking at Isaiah 53:8, we have to know what source text we're looking at in order to be fair to the person who is inconsistent or different. Maybe he has justification. Maybe there's a manuscript that's different. So without helping us, without telling us a source, we can't test it. Therefore, what I believe is if you don't give us a source, there's no basis to believe your translation is meaningful because we don't know the source text, whether it's reliable or not. It could be a garbage text. It could be you've corrupted it because you don't care about the words on the page. You worry more about an interpretation that's in the marginal notes, and you're going to make that your source of the actual text that you're going to show and tell people this is my quote translation, but it's really the interpretation, for example, of Rashi. So this is a problem. People have a right to know what you're doing. And if you're hiding that, and that's a possibility, they don't want anyone to know and want to make it mysterious that there's just this, quote, Masoretic text, and you have to just accept it as is. Well, that's not the real world. The people have a right. The Jewish people have a right to know what text you're relying upon. And so do the Jewish Christian people who want to learn from Jewish people what is the truth. And Zechariah prophesies we're going to turn to the Jewish people to seek truth, but we have to be discriminating at the same time. And this is a blockade to understanding what is the source text and then therefore taking seriously what Mr. Singer says, particularly when it's in conflict with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Ben Chayyim version, the Aleppo Codex, and the Leningrad Codex. He's in conflict with all of the texts we know about and can prove that there have been English translations of a text that anybody can look at the Hebrew. All right, so let's continue. Okay, now, so before we go look at Leeser again from 1853, let's just look at the recent 1999 Jewish Publication Society Hebrew English Tanakh. This is what it reads, and this is page 971. And it reads, I'm just going to read the quote out separate, just verse 8. By oppressive judgment he was taken away. Who could describe his abode? For he was cut off from the land of the living through the sin of my people who deserve the punishment. Do you see any him or them? No, that's it. That's all it is. There's nothing there to support him in the Leningrad Codex. This is what this is translating. Now let's look at the Ben Chayyim. Okay, this is the translation of Mr. Leeser. He's a rabbi, very reputable person. I found that the 1907 edition is the same as the 1853, but I just wanted to show you there, same page, so it's literally a reprint. And let's read that. We could read it in 1907, let's say. Through oppression and through judicial punishment was he taken away, but his generation, who could tell that he was cut away out of the land of life, parenthetical that, meaning it's not necessarily there, he's suggesting it, that for the transgression of my people, the plague was laid on him. And by the way, it's him, not them. Again, so now you have the Leningrad Codex, the Ben Chayyim Codex are against Mr. Tovia Singer. Now the only one left is Aleppo, right? That's all one I have to look at. Okay, so now the last of the source texts we should look at is the Aleppo Codex. It was found in a single synagogue in Aleppo, and it was there basically until 1958, but it was never known outside of that synagogue until 1958. So let me read this to you from Wikipedia here. The Codex was kept for 5 centuries in the central synagogue of Aleppo, Syria, until the synagogue was torched during 1947 anti-Jewish riots in Aleppo. The fate of the Codex during the subsequent decade is unclear. When it resurfaced in Israel in 1958, roughly 40% of the manuscript, meaning it was offered for sale in 1958, it should be clear, roughly 40% of the manuscript, including the majority of the Torah section, was missing, and only 2 additional leaves have been recovered since then. So unfortunately, we have basically lost the Torah in that work due to these anti-Jewish riots of 1947. That's a tragedy of historical proportions. But because it's so identical in Isaiah 53 to the Dead Sea Scrolls, you almost know what this is going to do. It's going to prove the Dead Sea Scrolls were valid. The original supposition that the missing pages were destroyed in the synagogue fire has increasingly been challenged, fueling speculation that they survive in private hands. And apparently these things sell for a lot of money. So it could be that's what happened. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at Jeff Benner's article, The Great Isaiah Scroll in the Masoretic Text, where he comments on the comparison for Isaiah 53, verse 11, in the Great Isaiah Scroll versus the Aleppo Codex. And you're going to see it's just 3 letters. This is how he explains it. Of the 166 words in Isaiah 53, there are only 17 letters in question. 10 of these letters are simply a matter of spelling, which does not affect the sense. 4 more letters are minor stylistic changes, such as conjunctions. The 3 remaining letters comprise the word light, L-I-G-H-T, which is added in verse 11, and which does not affect the meaning greatly. Furthermore, this word is supported by the Septuagint LXX. So if you go to Greek, you'll see the same word is translated. Now, this is in the prophets, so this would have been a Christian translation in the probably 300s that had the word light, but that also tells you what they're looking at the time was the word light was still in the Hebrew text. Again, that's why knowing this date of the Great Isaiah Scroll to 200 BC means the Christians couldn't have tampered with it. It just happens to be that it matches what the Christians had translated in what was called the Septuagint, but is really a Christian Septuagint. They had the word light. So that confirms this is not a mistake that we find, happen later. This was in texts that will continue to exist into the 300s when that Septuagint, 300 AD, when the Christian Septuagint was being worked on continuously. Thus, in one chapter of 166 words, Isaiah 53, there's only one word, 3 letters in question, after 1,000 years of transmissions. Well, it's really 2,000 years of transmission. And this word does not significantly change the meaning of the passage. And this is in Norman Geisler's and William Nix's General Introduction to the Bible, Moody Press, page 263. Of course, these are Christian sources. If anybody believes the Christians are lying about what the Aleppo Codex difference is, let me know. But he's talking about the Aleppo Codex, and the difference is 3 letters, and only for the word light. Now, we'll see what that is about in a second. But that's it. So it does not have, I'll show you where the word light is, but it does not have anything about the word him or them involved. You'll see. All right, so here's a comparison chart that's online, and I just borrowed this. You can see here the Dead Sea Scrolls have it in 53:11. Out of the suffering of his soul, he will see light and find satisfaction, and through his knowledge, his servant, the righteous one, will make many righteous, and he will bear their iniquities. And if you go over to you go to the Jewish Publication Society version of 1917 and its revision of 1985, but it's not still the Leningrad yet. And you will see it says, out of his anguish he shall see it. What? It doesn't explain. But so it said light initially, right? Then over here in the Ben Chayyim version from 1865, 1907, it's all the same. Freed from the trouble of his soul, shall he see the good, and it's in parentheses, meaning he's guessing what it might be, and be satisfied. Through his knowledge shall my righteous servant bring the many to righteousness, while he will bear their iniquities. So in this instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls is consistent with everything that's in the Aleppo Codex. Everything here, identical, except the word light. And if you look over here in the Tanakh, 1985, Leeser, both are the 1985 Tanakh JPS has the word it, whatever that means, and the Ben Chayyim doesn't have anything. It just guesses that it means he sees what? The good. That's the guess, and that's why it's in parentheses. So you really have no rebuttal. The Aleppo Codex does not have anything different here on this side, left. It doesn't even have the it and the good. It has nothing. It's just blank. It's like it dropped out. The 3 letters are gone in the Aleppo Codex, but otherwise identical to 53:11 in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So Mr. Singer this is his last hope, is he's trying to rely upon the Aleppo Codex, I suppose, if he had to look somewhere, and it doesn't agree. It just simply is this text without the word light. And then how the word light disappeared, I don't know, but you can see there is the possibility, and I could say it's more than a possibility, that this he and him and whatever, this person, he's suffering of his soul, he will see light. And it was talked about he would be taken to death. So judgment and death in the prior verse 8. From detention and judgment, he was taken away. Who can even think about his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. He was stricken with the transgressions of my people. That's verse 8. And then verse 9. Then they made his grave with the wicked, with the rich people in his tomb, although he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Verse 10. Yet the Lord was willing to crush him, and he made him suffer, although you make his soul an offering for sin. And he will see his offspring, and he will prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will triumph in his hand. And then you get this. Out of the suffering of his soul, he will see light. What do you think that means? He's been killed. Definitely been killed before this. He's going to have resurrection. I can't make this stuff up. Neither can you. And you can't change the word of God. You can't add it to. You can't use interpretations. You can't rely upon the Aleppo Codex, deleting it, because it's all from, it dates to the 1000s, to the medieval text. All these texts, Ben Chayyim, medieval, Aleppo, medieval. Same thing with Leningrad, all medieval. These are in the post-Christian era. Unfortunately, Christians were evil in their persecution of the Jewish people. They banned you from saying the Shema. I get it. Justinian did that, persecuted you, did all kinds of evil things to you. You can't believe this is a religion from God. And I agree. That religion was corrupted by a guy named Constantine, and that's why they did all these evil things. And just have to see that sometimes people, by mistake or by coercion of government, can do evil things. Don't judge Jesus by what happened hundreds of years after the fact. And God is testing those Jewish people. That's all I can tell you. And you are going to be the light to the Gentiles, because you can tell us what your texts read, but you have to stick by your text and not allow yourselves to add traditions and add interpretations and make that change the word of God. You have to stick to the text, just like the Karaite Jewish people are trying to say, hey, we can't add to these texts. We cannot add interpretations and make those the text and replace them. Anyway, so I think I made my point as to Isaiah 53, verse 8. There is definitely, this verse is here, and it has no word, he was stricken for the transgression of my people. It doesn't say anything about, and a plague befell them. In the Tanakh of the JPS, 1917 as well as 1985, it doesn't have that either. Through the sin of my people who deserve the punishment. Doesn't have the him or them issue at all. See, twice, blown away. Now, you have it in the Ben Chayyim version. That's where you have it, but it says him and not them. So Tovia Singer's source text has to be somewhere, but nowhere does it get agreed. It's disagreed with by the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's disagreed by the JPS. It's disagreed by the plague was laid on him in Ben Chayyim. And I showed you, let's go again and look at the 1999 Leningrad Codex for verse 8, and we'll see, is there anything about him or them? All right, so here's the Jewish Publication Society's translation in 1999 of the Leningrad Codex. You can see chapter 53 here, and we can go through the whole thing, but I'm going to just scroll through to get to verse 8 so we can test this out. Here is verse 7. Let's start at verse 7, but we're just going to see, you'll see here, there is no him or them, but just read the whole thing so you can just see. He was maltreated, yet he was submissive. He did not open his mouth, like a sheep being led to the slaughter, like a ewe dumb before those who shear her. He did not open his mouth. Here's verse 8. By oppressive judgment he was taken away. Who could describe his abode? For he was cut off from the land of the living through the sin of my people who deserved the punishment. Just like I said, that text that's added on, a plague befell them, not only is it not there, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense without it. And this is perfectly what it says. Through the sin of my people who deserve the punishment. That's what it said. He was cut off from the land of the living through or by the sin of my people who deserve the punishment. So he took on the punishment that they deserved. That's all it says. That's Isaiah. That's God, Yahweh speaking through Isaiah. That's the Leningrad Codex. And again, what do we find out? The Dead Sea Scrolls is identical to the Aleppo Codex. So this is why you can't find anything that would disabuse you of believing this is the correct line. You've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Leningrad Codex, and the Aleppo Codex all lining up on this particular verse perfectly. All right, so getting to the final conclusion that I started with, which is the best and only known Masoretic sources, the Ben Chayyim of 1525, the Leningrad Codex translation in English of 1999, and the Aleppo Codex, which really hasn't been translated yet, but as to Isaiah 53, we know exactly that it's identical to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it doesn't have the word, even that clause about a plague befell them. It's not even there. And therefore, all Jewish translations into English of these rebut whatever is Tovia Singer's source for Isaiah 53, verse 8. Okay, that's all I wanted to establish. So I hope that answered all the critics' claims. And if I've left anything out, please let me know. I look forward to hearing more from you, particularly the Jewish people who've been watching the channel. I appreciate that very much. And I try to educate you as well as to your own manuscript history. And that you also don't allow people to allow tradition to change and add to or take away from the Word of God. So tradition should never be used. That marginal notes are marginal notes, and that's what the Karaites tried to say. Don't use marginal notes to change the Word of God or interpret it so much that you would even change the letters because you want your interpretation to seem valid. All right, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.